And here you have your padded lapel, as you can see, all along the bridle towards the outer lines that we drew. And if I reverse it, you'll see all these little pricks coming through to the other side, and the fact that this lapel has a tendency to now want to curl. So we're about to add your facing to your fore parts. Now the facing is the bit of cloth that comes and covers the visible portion of the lapel, and then continues down in through the inside of the quarters, which are this section here. So it sits throughout that section there. The way we do this is by creating a false edge in the coat to prevent any bulk from accumulating in that region, and to allow for a clean press and a nice finish when the coat's all sewn up. There are a number of steps involved, a number of ways of doing this. We're going to try and do this in sort of a rapid, effective way. But know that there are a variety of methods by which you may be able to do this, as with everything that you're being taught here. So take everything with a pinch of salt. This is simply adapted to teaching you ways that we feel most relevant to the course, but there are better ways or different ways of doing all of this. So to start off with, we're going to mark all of the points, we're going to mark the line of our front edge. So I'm just going to grab a small ruler. So we'll begin by marking, make sure it's in strong chalk. Like so. And as you're coming around curves, make sure that you're using your ruler in small sections. Like so. Once you've done that, draw a line up from here, and draw a line down approximately here. So this is again an approximation, and this is where your facing will end on the inside of your coat, and that sits about, measure it approximately. Again, most things are done by eye and replicated on the other side. It's about 4.5 inches from the front edge. The next step is to remove all of the mark stitches along these lines so that they don't interfere with your stitch. And then we're going to trim the edges to a seam. Like so. We're now going to trim back 3/8 of an inch from this line. you can draw a line, or best way to do it really is to get 3/8 in your eye and be able to chop straight down. Okay. Again, ensuring that you're not cutting into the bottom of the coat, but you're staying 3/8 of an inch in. Our next step is to trim this back to about 3/8 beyond where we're going to be stitching. So we need to trim 3/4 of an inch all the way down this coat. Starting at the top here and pulling only on the top section, of course, of canvas. So. Like so. Having now done this, we're going to apply tape to this edge to ensure that it can be stitched in place and held to the facing. So I have my strips, my fusible over here, and I'm going to lay the edge of my strip 3/8 to 1/2 inch inside of where my canvas is trimmed back. Again, you can trace this line as well, or simply do it by eye. So my strip is going like so. So it's overlapping the canvas by about 3/8 to 1/2 inch. I'm going to go to the iron and press this down all the way through the section of my full part. From here, 1/2 inch behind. Make sure that you've got a layer of calico beneath because you're going to be sticking onto the board otherwise. Trimming that back. Starting up here, create a slight overlap on your previous section to make sure that those two portions of fusible can be stitched to one another. And again, continue down, leaving an overlap about 1/2 inch. You might have to pull ever so slightly to rotate the fusible round. Make sure that you're not tugging it firmly. then as you come into the corner here, we're going to section the fusible off. First bit down. Making sure that there's an overlap in the second section. The same as you're going round. Last bit, coming across the bottom of the coat. And ending on the canvas. With that now all firmly in place, lift your coat off the board and trim all the excess of fusible out. And there we have it. Your next step is to mark the line for your front edge, starting at this point here, and simply create a running stitch all the way along that line so that you've marked it through to the other side. so. We're then going to prep the bottom of our coat. So, before we do that, we need to ensure that our inlays on the side seams are trimmed, stretched, snipped, and folded over. To do this, we're going to come around and 1 inch above where our vent begins, we're going to snip in 3/8 of an inch. We're then going to trim our lining back, our inlays back by the same amount, heading slowly back into the inch that we left. This reduces the amount of inlay on the waist, which, if excessive, can cause a tightness in the coat. We then put small snips in through that waist curve. This means that the inlay here can be sewn right up to the point of the snips, but there is an excess bit of stretch there that ensures that the inlay isn't tight. We're then going to fold this back 3/8 of an inch and fuse this beforehand with a layer of sticky to prevent it from stretching. So my fusible is now stuck in place and it sits about 1 inch in from that edge. I'm going to trim the excess back. And then I'm going to mark the bottom of my coat, like so, making sure that it's nicely in line. And I'm going to raise the bottom on this point by a good 1/4 of an inch from a seam back from this mark stitch. So a seam back from the mark stitch, which is where the vent is going to lay in, which is here. I'm going to raise that to a 1/4 above this line here. That will prevent the underside of the vent from being visible when the back covers it. Our next step is to add our silicea stay. So we're going to cut a strip of silicea, which is about 1 1/4 inch wide, and lay it in place across the bottom of the coat. So cut your strip, as usual, wider than you need it to be. So I cut it about 2.5 inches wide. Move your pocket bag out of the way, grab a ruler, and from the bottom of your bag, where it hits the canvas, across the bottom of your coat, mark a line, like so. Then position your silicea to overlap the canvas by about 1/2 inch or 3/4, and baste it very lightly along this section. You can see that I've got a stagger here, making sure that there is no accumulation anywhere. Place that in place, following our marked line. Make sure that your silicea is not tight here. If it's tight, then it'll be visible on the side where your top cloth sits. Pull that all the way into the end, like so. Back tack. Then reverse this already trim off the ends of the silesia to a stagger, so about a good 1/4 of an inch staggered on this section, so there's no overlap. Reverse your coat, trace in to the silesia your new line for the bottom of the coat, and then there heading up as we kick it, and trim this back 1/8 shorter. This is a bare 1/8, can be a 16th. It's just so the fold of the coat isn't interfered by our silesia stay. And there you have it. Once that's done, we're going to start padding all of this in place with some black thread. So to begin with, begin by securing with a light pad, and you only need to catch the fusible, the edge of your silesia stay, on the side body side. We then further secure it to this seam, like on the cuff, giving that a pad like so. And then the last securing point will be on the canvas over here. Again, only catching your canvas. Make sure you've not caught anything else, and secure it all along the length of that overlap. I'm using the flicking technique with my needle, and I can feel that I've caught the canvas and that I've flicked it out of the top cloth. And there you have it. I now want to pad stitch the fusible all along the canvas over here, ensuring that I only touch the canvas and not the top cloth that sits beneath. This is going to secure the front edge in place so that when we stitch only in the fusible and in the top cloth and in the facing, and that this edge is left free of canvas. Start off with whatever side you like, and simply use that flicking technique again to ensure that you're catching the fusible permanently in place. This is a small pad stitch, 3/8 to a 1/2 inch apart with every stitch. Again, I'm only catching the canvas, not the top cloth, and I'm flipping my needle out of the way. I then need to go over all of the intersections in the cuts that I make. So there's one intersection over here where there's an overlap, and just very lightly pad along the edges, only catching the fusible together, just to make sure that they don't come apart from one another. And do this all along the line. A couple more down here. Again, only catching the fusible with the fusible. If you catch your top cloth, you're going to have visible marks on the underside. Have it. Our next step is to trim the inlay back over here 1/4 of an inch smaller than the width of our Felicia band. Now grab a tape measure. And apply it to there. And that's 1 1/4 inches. 1 1/4 inches. And then it gets smaller up here and goes down to 1 inch. We then trim this back. So. And cut that back. We're now going to turn the edges of the underside of our vent. Come back here and turn this back 1/2 inch at 3/8. You can trace this or do it by eye. Like so. Quickly press that in place. And with that pressed, we can now turn up the bottom of our coat. Starting over here and creating a fold beneath to tuck in the inlay. And proceed with the baste all the way along. 2 bastes will do it. 1 to hold down the very edge of the bottom of the coat. and the other to hold down the edge of the inlay. Now, as you come in to this section, trim this inlay back to the line at which it's being sewn, so you can fold it. Like so. Baste up, and then continue basting all the way along the other edge. Then I'm going to go and press this, and then cross or pad stitch the bottom in place, and edge stitch this edge over here. So we'll now proceed to padding, or hem stitching, or cross stitching, whichever you prefer to do. So just fell this section down here, securing it in place. Making sure that the lip of the edge over here is not visible on the other side. It's being displaced back. And then proceed with your hem stitch. This, you are only catching the inlay of your top cloth and the cilicia. You're not catching the top cloth itself. So you're stitching the inlay and the cilicia together, and you're not catching the top cloth. just take that all the way to the end. And then to further secure it down, you can pad the edges of your inlay down to just the canvas. Like so. Okay. Now for your edge stitch. Again, black thread. Start from one end. Conceal your stitch. And edge stitch 1/4 of an inch back from the folded edge of your vent. Rather the underside of your vent. Again, very lightly, it's just to hold the edge in place, and you want it as invisible as possible. Tiny little prick stitches all the way through. just back tack as you got to the top. We're now ready to add our facings.
This is nice.
So we're now going to attach our facing. We take our facing cloth, and I've got my arrow pointing down that way. This is right side facing me. This is my wrong side marked. I'm then going to lay my forepart in place, making sure that the top of my lapel, this section here, is running parallel to the grain, like so. That I've got about 4 inches of covering past my inlay edge here on the neck point at the shoulder, and then I've got enough coverage down here to get to my folded point. So I manipulate that into place, making sure I've got an excess if I can get it, like so. And I begin by basting it in place from the button up. So I find my button here, and I begin basting up from here. I'm going to be basting just inside of my stitch line. So I start by back tacking. And I proceed up, making sure everything is firstly flat. Then, as I come into the point of the lapel, I begin to integrate a little bit of fullness into the point. So we're going to start it at this section over here. So baste up a little bit more. And this is where we start including touches of fullness. So I'm going to come with my hand underneath, and I'm going to throw a tiny little bubble of cloth in place. These are really small amounts of cloth that will allow for my point to be able to be turned. Tiny little amounts of excess cloth just being thrown into place. Once I get to the tip, I back tack and I flip my coat over, putting my needle through to the other side. I then mark where my point will be by using a chalk. So here I can visualize where my point is, and within that point I'm going to include a little bubble of fullness. Now that bubble is a bubble going down and across. So I'm creating a little raise to make sure that I can turn my point in place. This is something that's appreciated by eye. There isn't a true measure for any of this. As with a lot of things, you'll be noticing a tailoring. I then stitch down, securing it just a little further down than I need to. So, with that done, I now flip my coat round, and I'm now going to swing my canvas. So, first things first, lay everything nice and flat, making sure that both elements, coat and canvas, are nice and flush. Mark a point that comes down to the bottom of the quarters. Mark another point which is a ½ inch in front of that approximately. Draw a line and swing your coat to that line. Once that's done, pin that in place. Then reverse your coat and stitch down to that pin, making sure that both layers are sitting nice and flush against one another. What this does is it throws a little bit of length through this section of the coat. Remember, you've got a dart coming out of here, so you don't want for there to be any tightness occurring within that section, or it'll disturb the drape of the coat. Once we get to that point, we then back tack, remove the pin, and we're now going to pull the facing ever so slightly tight as we curl round. Now, this is something that's usually done on the tape, but it's something that you can do on the facing, again different methods, and to facilitate your sewing, we're going to do this on the facing instead. So as I'm coming round, I'm going to pull ever so slightly tight all the way round. Over here we're including fullness, over here we're including a tightness. So I'm just pulling slightly. Again, I'm really not pulling tight, just creating a little bit of tension against the full part. And I'm pulling down and across. Stitch that all the way to the edge. Now that that's done, you'll be able to see the little amount of fullness that's been thrown into place by swinging the facing back, and we'll now be able to proceed with sewing the facing in place once we've trimmed very lightly around this edge. So, come into here, trim this back, I'm just leaving a little excess past that point, which we'll trim at a later date. This is just so I can sew it into place with a bit more ease. Like so. The last bit we're going to do is mark the round for our point. So come back into the mark stitch that you put into place, remark it through, like so, and find a small round object which will allow you to form a nice little curve to the point. Here I'm going to use a crayon. I'm going to apply the flat edge to the point and trace around it. This gives me a nice neat curve to follow as I'm stitching around. And there you have it. We can now go and stitch the facing in place. Just to remind you where we're starting and stopping. So we're starting at that intersection that we made on the lapel over here, that we chalked through. We're coming up, round the point, all the way down, and then stopping again at the intersection that we made with the bottom over here, and not sewing obviously into the inlay. So starting at that point that we've traced, I'm going to back tack firmly in place with a couple of stitches, and then proceed down the point. Make sure that your stitch is a fairly small one, and then as you get into the point, begin reducing your stitch length. Now I like to do this part by hand. And by swivelling along down the curve. So, once you get past the curve, then you can begin sewing with your foot again. As you come into your right position, swivel. And go very slowly around your curve, making sure that you sew evenly. And then as you come in here, make sure that you meet the exact point at which your inlay is turned up. Like so. Now, to begin trimming our facings, we're going to start by removing our bastes. And removing our threads. We're then going to start, so we're going to leave a bit of an excess up here of about a ½ inch, and then once I get about 3/8 past my stitch point, I'm going to come down, and I'm going to leave an 1/8 past what I've already left on the fore part, just to stagger that edge once it's folded round. Now this means that if you've trimmed properly, this edge here should sit flush with a 3/8 behind it, and then this edge here will sit an 1/8 past that, which means that none of the edges should overlap in exactly the same point. Now, as we come into this point, what I'm going to do is come down my 1/8 and trim, and then snip at an angle from the other side into my sewn point, like so. And then, removing these bastes, I'm then going to trim the very point of my peak. So, in order to do that, I'm going to come in place, and I'm going to begin narrowing the amount of inlay that's left about an 1/8 into the point. Do the same coming out of the point on the other side, like so, and then round the point, leave yourself, again, a bare 1/8 of an inch. Now you need to be very delicate in this section. If you leave too much, you won't be able to turn the point out. If you leave too little, the point will fray out. Like so. Now remove all your bastes, and you can then begin turning your facings. So this is an edge board, and what an edge board allows you to do is to press small seams that are in tight little corners, and they're particularly relevant for facings. So we're going to start with the point. I'm going to take our lapel here and place it on the edge board and push the point of the board into the point of our lapel. And we'll begin by pressing this out, making sure that we're right in there. So make sure that everything's flush against the board, and then go ahead and open that seam. Make sure it's nice and open, no lips forming, and keep going down your front edge. As you get to the corner, stop, and then use the section of the board that feels most relevant to the point that you're pressing. For instance, I can start using this corner here, or that corner there. Small sections, just press that all out.
press the other point, sorry, other side of your point out, this side here. Making sure that you don't fray out that little snip. And once it's nicely pressed out, we can then start turning our facing in.
So, begin by snipping into the curve. You can do this beforehand, but I like to see approximately how much I need to snip out. You can over-snip this and it will be an issue. Some cloths don't need quite so much. Tiny little triangles all the way out of that length until it sits flat. So. And the same on the other side. Now we start turning. So starting off with the button, and we want to hide the seam towards the inside of where it will be seen. Take the point and begin to turn it out. Just remembering to snip the canvas side of the point as well. There. So on a notch, you wouldn't snip that point, only on a peak do you snip it. Just start teasing it out slowly. So I use my needle to pry my point out and apply it to the underside of the lapel to make sure that I'm not scarring any cloth. So we'll leave that as a start, and we'll start at the bottom. So, at the bottom, we're going to go 50-50 and make our seam lie on top of itself. Put the basting there, which sits innate behind the front edge. And as we start to go up the lapel, we're going to curl that edge back, making sure that the seam is disguised on the other side. Tiny little bastes to secure that all in place. At the same time as curling the seam back, you're making sure that you're curling it along a straight line and that you're blowing the edge all the way out. Assessing my work at all times, making sure I'm doing a good job, and if I'm not, I'm going back on it. Now, as I come into the peak, I'm going to put the back tack there, that far down, and I'm going to pry my point out completely. This is a slow job. Take your time. You don't want to be forcing this out. You want to slowly be pulling it. If you pull it too hard, you risk undoing some of the stitches. You just be very delicate. It can be a little bit difficult at times to pull it entirely out, but if you trim back enough, you should be able to do so. And once you start seeing those stitches on the outer edge of that curve, stop pulling. Again, assess your work, make sure it's looking nice and neat. And symmetrical as well, that's important. And that's looking good. Now we can carry on with the point. So this is where the fullness in the point comes into play. Because it's such a small section, in order for you to shift that seam back, you need that little bit of excess cloth to allow for that. As we're going along, we're making sure that our point is coming in a dead straight line all the way up. Into the curve, bring it back out. And then back down the other side. Again, ever so slightly carrying back that seam. And stop there. Great. We can now do the bottom section of the coat. Working from the other side this time. And remembering this time we're curling the seam back the other way so that it's not visible. Start at the button point and begin curling back. Back tack to secure it in place. And haven't quite held it back enough there, so I'm going to undo my work and go back. As you're going along, you'll feel how thin your edge is, and that's thanks to all that tape work that you put into place. You can imagine how that would feel if it had a layer of canvas in there as well. Again, I repeat myself, as I'm curling, I'm also making sure that I'm curling evenly all the way along, so that my curves, my front edge, is a regular line. As I get to the bottom here, just past the curve, I then flip my needle through, come to the other side, and begin basting from this end to match up the bottom of my coat with where I've left that inlay. So you've got a free end here, which is loose, like so, and we're just going to tack it down a couple of inches along. Make sure that your seams are lining up here. Everything's sitting nice and flush. Again, this lip here needs to be slightly raised from the inlay, so that it's not visible from the right side of the coat. And I tack it just 1.5 inches in, like so. I can now go and press all of this out. Before doing that, you can, if you want, put a securing stitch in place, a second stitch, just to hold that edge nice and firmly in place. This is an absolute necessity, something that you can skip, but is a useful stitch to put into place. So the way you do that is simply by coming in exactly where you've sewn it, and pop a very light pad which encourages the curl that you've set in place. Again, here you're going through all layers. Do exactly the same thing on the other side. As I come down into the quarters and into that round, I'm making sure that my facing is sitting slightly tighter beneath, and I'm basically curling it round like this, creating a little bit of shape in there to hold the bottom of the coat in. Much like the pad stitch on your lapel, it's the same phenomenon where we're creating a little bit of a curl. Now going to go to the board and press this all out. Now that we've got this in place, we're going to mark where our facing is going to end. So coming up to the top here, we leave about 2.5 inches at the top, so exactly where that is there. And then down here, we leave about anywhere between 2.5 to 3 inches down here to about there. And we're then going to draw a line which vaguely keeps those proportions up to the button, and then curving out to the top, like so. We're then going to grab a pin, pin the top here in place, turn it around, and trim this section to the same shape. We're going to leave that little bit of an excess in place there, sticking out past, just to help us turn that over later on. So leaving that in place, turn it round, and what we can begin to do is start forming the curl of our lapel. Now to do this, we're going to grab a chalk and our ruler, and we're going to mark our break line in place, very, very lightly. We're also going to mark across our gauge line. through, like so. And then I've got my light break line over here. Take that out. Now, at this point, what we want to do is start prepping for when the collar is going to come in. And we want to extend this past our break line about 1 inch. So measure 1 inch out from here, like so, and snip into that corner, like that. And then even out this rung over here. What we're going to do is trim this back to about an even 1/2 inch, like so. And then we're going to stagger our inlays over here. So we come and remove this, come down here 1/4 inch, trim that off, and then stagger the bridle as well, coming down 1/4, undoing that baste and trimming that off. You can stagger the bridle into the inlay for the collar, leaving everything else in place. Now that we've done that, we're going to go and press this line out on the board, and we're going to redraw it through on this side so that we've got a reference to where it needs to go. To do that, we're simply going to move it back, twist it round, and remark that through to the canvas. And retrace that in place, like so. There we go. So I press this line in, and then I come back. We're now going to press the gorge. So we're not securing it yet. Be very careful of this point. It's very fragile. And just press on the line that we chalked, like so. And press that all the way to the snip that we made. Again. Make sure that that end there is sitting nice and neat. And I'll go back to the tailoring board. So now what you do is you want to make sure that as your lapel rolls, that you're including some length into this gorge and into the lapel itself to allow for that curl. Again, we're thinking of relative lengths. This is on the outside, this is on the periphery of a circle, and it needs to be longer than what sits inside. Otherwise it's tight and our lapel is going to want to curl forwards. In order to do this, we're going to mimic the roll that it's going to have. Placing the lapel curled as it might be on the wearer, and lining it up with the line that you've chalked. We're going to break it on our break line and base the gorge line down. Very delicately stitching it in place. Making sure that there's no tightness in that curl. Again, once you get to the other side, secure it in place with a pin, allowing for that curl while you do it, and continue to baste it in. lapel as you go. And base that all the way up to the little notch that we made. You can now release that pin, and you can see how the lapel has that tendency to flop over. With this same base, snip, knot, place a square behind your brake line, curl your lapel back, and place a pad stitch all along this curl, bringing a little bit of cloth into the lapel so that it's wanting to sit nice and flat. Make sure that this space is nice and loose, and I'll show you the effects of it in a second. You'll be able to see a little bubble of cloth form in that lapel, which allows for everything to sit nice and flush. We're now going to trim back our facing to the line that we drew. Making sure we're not cutting anything underneath. You can put your hand underneath, or you can lift the cloth up. Best put your hand probably. And snip all the way down, nice and neatly. As you come into the bottom, do it from the other end, and make sure that this is really crisp and sharp, because this raw edge is going to stay visible. Just along that section there. I then want you to grab some black thread so with your black thread, cross stitch this raw edge in place to the inlay before it starts fraying. Again, you're only catching your inlay, not the front of the coat. Once that's caught in place, tack off. And begin securing down your facing. So this section of the facing needs to be left flapping like this, because we're going to have to access the shoulders. Tack it down, we're going to have to undo it in a second. So we're only going to start securing our facing from this point down, so that we have plenty of access into the seam over here. To secure your facing, grab some basting cotton, knot it, and begin by very gently laying your facing out nice and flush. Pull the coat beneath it in this direction to make sure that the facing is not tight, and then begin by putting a little baste in and only securing the baste to the canvas, not the top cloth. As you're going along, you're going to have to make sure that you pop your needle, making sure that you're only grabbing the first layers of canvas. So we're going to form a very loose back tack all the way down with our basting, making sure that we're just not pulling tight, it's not loose either, it's laying exactly flush with the coat. Again, make sure that you haven't caught the top cloth. As you come down into the pocket, you're going to stop and back over here. And we're going to come around the pocket, like so. Here, be very careful, you've only got one layer of canvas here, so as you're catching it, make sure that you're not catching your top cloth. You can feel for it underneath. Back tack. And then proceed with your next line going down. Now, as I come into the pocket, I'm only going to want to catch the silicea in my pocket. I don't want to catch the facing of my pocket bag, only the top layer going down. Just feel for that as you go down. You can stop. Just over here and back tack. At a later date, we're going to edge stitch or prick stitch all across here just to secure the canvas in place in this section so it's not secured to the back. There'll also be a stitch coming down here to make sure that none of this can ever stem forward. We're now going to trace the line to which our 4-part lining is going to be placed. And it'll sit approximately 3/4 of an inch in front of the raw edge that we've just drawn. It's the other way around. Like so. Now, if we grab our 4-part lining and start placing this on, we can start deciding where that needs to be orientated. I'm just going to quickly press that.